Okay.
Is it recording or not?
Yeah, it's recording.
Now let's go.
Thank
Can you
you.
hear me?
July.
Can you hear me or not?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think this should be, well, Ed said it's fine. It doesn't have to be that close, but
All right, can you hear me now?
yeah.
You picking me up, Charles?
Yep.
But the
Okay.
earphones don't seem to be picking up the tape.
Well, it doesn't matter. You can listen to
Try
it
it.
without the earphones.
Try it.
Charles,
Let me
leave
just
alone. Oh yeah, that'll help. Okay, yeah, all right, now I know what we're
Can you
doing.
hear me?
Yeah, I hear everything that's going on. Okay, July 1st, 1990 in Millboro with Charles and Dad and me.
You sure it's recording that? 'Cause
Yes, it's
you're aware
recording
that.
all of it. I can hear all of it.
You hear everything in the room, huh?
Mhm.
All right, good. You just go away now and I'll start talking.
No, that's no fun.
You want family history now?
I want to be able to adjust this.
You want family history or?
Yeah, I want you to tell me about some of those stories.
All right, I'll tell you about as much as I know, but I don't know too much. I've got a very bad sore throat too, and so I've got to do this thing and get it over with.
All right, just do what you feel up to.
I should have some way to start it and stop it. My father in
I
his
can
tapes
stop.
talks about the death of his father, and when his father died, he died of appendicitis at home, ruptured appendicitis, which developed peritonitis and just died, high fever and all. Well, he had, because he was a doctor of medicine too, he had a skeleton that he had used when he was studying anatomy. But his second wife, my grandmother, whose name was Virginia Phelps, would not allow him to have the skeleton hanging up the way he liked to have it. He liked to have everything hooked together with wire and hanging up on a little hanger. And she refused to allow any skeleton to be in the house doing that, so he had to put the skeleton's bones in a little keg, in which he kept a little nail keg, and he kept them upstairs in his room. And when he died, there were the bones. And so my grandmother, whose name was Miss Jenny Phelps, decided
That's
that
his wife.
his second wife,
Second
yes,
wife.
my father's mother, decided that they should have a funeral for the bones too. And so the question was, where should the bones be buried? And they looked them over and studied them for a while, and they observed that the feet of the bones were very large, larger than anybody's whole foot with a shoe on them. So they decided that no white man had a foot that big. So they probably belonged to a black man. And so they would have the funeral in the slave graveyard there on the farm, instead of having it in the white graveyard on the farm. Because in those days graveyards were segregated, and the ghosts were not allowed to mix together. They had to keep them separated in death, even though in life they might have been working side by side and often sleeping together, God knows what, but in death they were separated into ways. So they got a black minister came and held a ceremony for the bones in the slave graveyard there on the. Now my father saw nothing funny about that at all, but I thought it was just hilarious. And so later on I made a story about that. Tried to and never did finish it very well. Didn't turn out very good, but it could have been a real fine story about the burial of the bones in the slave graveyard. And then time passed along, and I got married, and I was living in Los Angeles with my little children. And I wanted them to know something about my home in Virginia. And since they love little pets, I was always talking about the animals that we had. And one of the animals we'd had was a dog named Zero. And Zero was a dog that was brought by my father home one night in the 30s, I think about 1934, 35, somewhere along in there, maybe a little earlier, when the temperature was way down below zero, and he came in carrying this little bitty pup.
I remember those Zero stories. I'd forgotten about them.
He came carrying this little bitty pup in his overcoat, little baby pup, and I was sick. And he took it out and he said, "I brought you a present." And I looked at it and I said, "What's his name?" He said, "Well, he's Zero because it's so cold outside." And so we named him Zero, and he That was about 1932, 33, I guess, 34, somewhere along in there. Well, 34, say. But before that, maybe. I was very small. And Zero lived a good long life, and when he got up in years, about 1942, 43, 44, somewhere along in there, he began to get real old. Previously, Zero had some troubles. We lived up at the house where the Nelsons live now. Mr. Nelson lives now in this village. And at that place was the road in those days was dirt. It's right beside the railroad tunnel, and the dirt road goes up on Tunnel Hill. And in those days, people come tearing tail off Tunnel Hill in their cars as hard as they could, and Zero loved to chase them. So one day, Zero chased like hell and got run over by one of the people from Tunnel Hill. Well, that was bad because a dog with a run-over leg is in bad shape. But we brought Zero up to the house, and Father set the leg, put it in a cast, covered the cast over with chicken wire, so put a muzzle on Zero so he couldn't chew. And lo and behold, Zero got over the broken leg and did well. He had a little bit of limp, but he'd run like mad. Then a little bit later on, about 1940, I suspect, 1939 or 40, probably 40, maybe 41, but probably 40. Zero developed a huge tumor on his left leg, great cancer. And so Father said he didn't know what to do, but he thought we...
Wait a sec. Okay.
Zero developed this huge tumor. And so Father said, well, we've got to operate, take that tumor off of him. So we took him into the office down here where my brother lives now, and put him up on the table and put a little cone, a little ether cone over his... It's not recording, is it? Charles, you have to stop it because it picks up any noise you make out there.
It just picks up those high tones pretty loud, those water and silverware.
Yeah, it mustn't do anything like that now.
Can I finish eating?
If you don't chew too loud.
You can chew, but just don't scrape things.
Delta, come back here.
And don't scrape the trash can lids.
You got to stop now. You got to start it.
It's going.
All right, well, let's go here. Come on. I said that we put him on the operating table and put an ether. We made sort of an ether cone special for him out of some gauze and a piece of a wire that he fitted over his nostrils. And I sat there dripping ether into the ether cone to give him anesthesia. And as soon as he was anesthetized real well, Father went to work on him and cut the damn thing off there. It was about the size of a cantaloupe. And he peeled it out of there and peeled it away from the skin. He got the blood cut. We put all the blood vessels back together again, and we couldn't stop the bleeding, and sewed him up and cut away another one that had metastasized a little bit to his belly. Got rid of it at the same time, and then we put a muzzle on him so he couldn't chew his bandages off, and put him in a great big box and kept him cool and all that, and he came along very well and did well. In those days he didn't have any antibiotics, so he had no antibiotics. It was just strictly by being real clean and sterilizing him and all that he got well. And the fact that he was
Did they have penicillin?
No antibiotics.
Huh.
None of those things existed when I was a child. The only way you were able to take care of an infection was by a wet dressing. You had no drug that would help it. If you had a boil, nothing would help it. If you had bad tonsils, nothing to help it. If you had an ear infection, nothing to help it. If you had a ruptured appendicitis, nothing to help it. Okay. That was why I had so much rheumatic fever, because they had no way to do it. So Zero got over that. And he lived for several more years. And then he began to get older, and so Father, at the time, I believe it was about the time that we operated on the tumor, he thought the dog was probably going to die, so he went to Mr. Armitrout, the daddy of Mr. Dietz's wife up here, Charlotte Armitrout, lived over there at the side of the hill where you go up to Huffman's today, and he had what was called a planing mill, where he planed lumber and made it real smooth. It was run by a little gasoline engine, old-time gasoline engine, one cylinder would chuck, 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 like that, spinning a big old flywheel, and running the flywheel would run a belt, and the belt would run the machinery. And I like to go up there all the time. And nowadays, they wouldn't let a child come near that place because it'd be too light to get killed. But nothing ever happened to me. I like to go up there and make the engine go and start it and all that sort of stuff and watch it. and help play in the wood and all that. I like to do that. So I did do it. So Miss Armentrout planed up some nice wood and made a coffin for Zero, so that should Zero die during the operation, we could go ahead and bury him. But he didn't die. As a matter of fact, he lived right through the Second World War, and it was about 1947, 48, somewhere along in there, right after the Second World War. One summer, they looked down toward the corner of the yard there in my father's place, where there was an apple tree, and there was Zero lying down underneath the apple tree. And we walked down to see about him. He was dead. He just died of old age. By that time, he was about 15, 16 years. This may have been 1950. I don't know. It was pretty late.
Then he got buried.
So then we buried him. And
did you still have the coffin?
they still had the coffin, put him in the coffin, and buried him in the backyard. And he made a tombstone for Zero out of concrete. And it's still over there. It says Zero, born so-and-so.
It does?
Yeah.
It's still over there?
It says 0. It doesn't say born.
Doesn't? I thought it did.
Where is it?
It may not be there anymore.
Over that apple?
It used to be over there. No, over there. But it may be gone now. I'm not sure. Anyhow, when I told my children about this story, I combined this story with the story of the bones, because I thought the story of the bones was a pretty good story. And so I said that my father had the preachers come.
That's why I
When
thought
Zero
something was missing from this story just now.
I said my father had the preachers come when Zero was buried, and my little children, who were just little bitty fellas there in Los Angeles, say, look and say, well, you had preachers come? I said, yeah, we had preachers come. And then they say, well, what kind of preachers came? I said, well, we had one white preacher and one black preacher. And so the little children looked at me and they said, why did you have a black preacher and a white preacher? I said, because Zero was a black and white dog, of course. Charles is saying you lied. Well, I wouldn't say I lied, but I'm like Mark Twain. I have way too much respect for the truth to associate with it too much.
Okay, let's talk about, because I know you know quite a lot about your father's family, and we also
I don't know too much about my mother's family.
I know you know less about hers, so let's talk about that one. Let's talk about hers first, since there's
I
less.
don't know very much about it.
I know, that's why we can get through it pretty quick.
I know that her father, whose name was Yerby,
Her father was Yerby, and they came from
he
North
came from
Carolina.
Richmond.
He came from Richmond, and
He was
before
from
that?
Richmond.
Before that?
I don't know where they were from before that. They lived in Richmond, over on Church Hill.
Were they Scotch-Irish, German, Presbyterian?
Yerby's English.
English?
Yeah.
They were English?
Yeah, English.
Church of England?
I don't know whether they were Church of England or not, but they were English. Yerby is an English name.
And then, as she grew up, they were Presbyterian?
No, honey, now you're jumping the line. Hold on. Religion has very little to do with anything, you know. I don't think my grandfather, as a matter of fact, ever went to church in his life except to sing or look at the women. That was him. He was very much a ladies' man. He was also very much a drunk who died of cirrhosis of the liver.
Oh, he did? Did you know him?
No, of course not. He was dead. My mother was only, I think she was 12 years old when he died.
That's right. And he came from Richmond?
He was from Richmond.
What
now
was
let's see
his
if I can tell
name?
you a little bit. His name was Frank Yerby.
Frank Yerby.
And there's somewhere around, I have pictures of him all over my brother's house. There are pictures of him and pictures of him with my rest of the family. Well, he's a very interesting man, though.
Did
So
your
you let
mother
me-
tell you about him, or did you learn more about him from other relatives?
My only relatives of my mother's I ever knew were my mother and my grandmother. The rest of them, none of them I ever knew. I knew my mother's sister, and I knew my mother's brother, but not to talk with them. Now I won't tell you what I knew about him.
Okay.
And then once again, this is sort of like the black and white preacher. It's based more or less on pure fact, but at the same time it may be a little bit altered in the remembering.
Well,
Now, Frank Yerby went down to North Carolina.
How old was he?
And worked there as an attorney.
Where did he go to school?
I do not know. I don't
But
know
he
where
was
he went
born
to
in
school.
Richmond?
Born in Richmond. He may have gone to school at Durham, University of North Carolina, somewhere in there. I don't know. But he was in Raleigh, and he was.
Around what time do you think he was born?
I don't know when he was born.
Well, around.
I don't know.
Well, your mother was 12 when he died, and how old was he when he died?
I don't know. He was probably 60-some. He might have been 70. He may have been born he was 30-some years old when he married my grandmother.
Uh-huh.
She was 16.
And that was in 19...
I think when he died...
Or in 18.
I think that when he died, one of my mother's sister's children is older than the youngest of my mother's brothers. One of her uncles is older than her brother.
Uh-huh.
Because her mother was only 16, and I think her father was 36 when they got married. Well, if he was 36 when they got married, and they got married probably about, I would say probably about, I would guess about 1890, but I'm not sure that that's the case. Mm-hmm. My mother, maybe about 1895, somewhere along there. Because if my mother was born in 1903, as I think she was, and he was 12, he would have died in 1915. Uh-huh. And at that time, so I would say they were probably born about 1896 when they were married. And so that he was probably born about 1850.
Or
1850 probably.
If he was 30.
1850, 1860, somewhere like that. He was born after the Civil War. And he went down to Raleigh, and there, you see, Raleigh is like Richmond. It's the capital of North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And there he had work as a lawyer, and perhaps as a petty politician, I don't know. He was a very handsome man, and he wrote extremely well. He was also a very gifted man in music. He played. You couldn't give him a musical instrument that he couldn't play. Give him about 2 or 3 hours, and he would be playing it by ear. Give him a fiddle, any stringed instrument. He also the same way with the guitar. The piano that we have over here, he bought for my mother when she was. The year he died, he bought it for her when she was 12, or maybe a little bit before then. And he was a great spendthrift. He would spend money on the wrong things. He loved his family, and he wrote real nice letters to them, which were always teasing and funny, like Mark Twain letters. He would write to my sister, my Aunt Carrie, who at that time weighed about 255 pounds. He said, "Dear little Terry," and he'd say, and he'd go through afterwards, and he would say all things to her. She said, "I'm sorry that you're not getting enough to eat down there in Richmond, and if you want to come home, we got lots of beans for you to have," and things like that. And sweet and teasing letters.
Did you read those letters?
I have seen some of them, but whatever happened to them, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
Don't know at all. Okay. Now my grandmother, there he was in Raleigh, North Carolina, working as a lawyer, and he was by this time I think a magistrate, a justice of the peace or something of that sort. He was 36. And my grandmother was born in Raleigh, but not right out in the country a little bit. And her name was Emma Stafford. Mm-hmm. And her grandfather had a great big farm there, on which the present city of Raleigh occupies the entire farm, and it was a pretty good sized farm. My understanding was 800 or 900 acres.
And he was also called Stafford?
He was a Stafford, of course.
Do you know his first name?
No, I don't know his first name. But I know that her grandfather was there, and her father was there too.
Do you know her father's name?
No, I don't. But I do know that the Stafford farm, part of the Stafford farm, was used as a state fairgrounds for North Carolina. And the grandfather had given it over to the state or something like that. And it was used for the fairgrounds. So my mother, when she was a little girl, was raised in the presence of gypsies who would tell her fortune, and merry-go-rounds on which she could ride all the time, and Ferris wheels where she could ride all the time, and ponies and horses and elephants and things like that.
But now wait, let's go back to
Well, I'm saying that was where my grandmother lived, but we haven't talked about the marriage of my.
That was where your grandmother lived?
Yes, my mother's mother.
Oh, she lived by the fairground too?
Well, that was her father and grandfather's home.
And didn't your mother also live by the fairground?
That's where she was raised.
So they both got raised by the fairground.
I don't know how well the fairground was there when my grandmother was a little girl. You see, I don't know, but possibly it was. But I know that when my mother was a little girl, from 1903 on, the fairgrounds was right there, and she, well, now I've got to tell you these stories. Now you just listen, don't interrupt me. I try to put them in some sort of order. You'll have to straighten them up later.
I'm just trying to get...
Grandfathers, my great-grandfather Stafford, my great-great-grandfather Stafford, and my great-great-great-grandfather Stafford
Your grand...
were all farmers. And
From
my great-great-great-grandfather Meredith came to my Aunt Carrie's, my mother's sister Carrie's wedding about 1910, I think. He was 115 years old at that time.
Where was he from? Where was he from?
Up near Durham, some part out in the country there.
Do you know his first name?
Samuel, I think. Samuel Meredith, I believe it was, but I'm not real sure. But anyhow, he came
Was he a farmer?
Yes. He came to the wedding and he walked all the way because he did not trust railroad trains. And automobiles, of course, were out of the question, and he was no longer, at the age of 115, up to riding by horseback, so he just walked.
From where?
It was a couple hundred miles.
From Durham to Raleigh?
I think it wasn't that far, about 125 or 30 miles, but he walked. And he came to the wedding. He died the next year, I guess. Well, now he was 115, and that's an interesting thing in my mother's family. Now, that's one of the interesting things in my mother's family. Another one of the interesting things in my mother's family is that the women were extraordinarily good looking. And they often had blue eyes, gray eyes, green eyes, various peculiar kind of hairs, and generally had dark hair, but occasionally they had rather a little bit red hair. But they had lovely features, good figures, and were beautiful, and being Southern girls, they were awful flirty. Well, that being the case, certain measures were always taken with Miss Emma, my grandmother, who was said to be the prettiest woman when she was about 14, 15, 16 years old, the prettiest young woman in North Carolina. She was really beautiful. And she was not allowed to go any place except with having a colored woman who walked right beside her and a colored woman who walked in front of her. And the colored woman who walked in front of her was supposed to keep an eye out to chase people away. And the colored woman who walked right beside her was the person who was always with her. And behind her then, about 40, 50 feet behind, they said wherever Miss Emma went, you would find a line of gentlemen walking along just looking at her, rolling their eyes from side to side, wishing they could get closer to her and staying back 50, 100 yards while she walked all over town, walked around the plazas and places and came home. That's when she was 14, 15 years old. Well, when she's 16 years old, they decided to send her away to school,
So they
finishing school, because
pretty prosperous family.
well, they were quite well to do.
What did they grow on their farm? Do you know?
I don't know. I imagine tobacco, maybe cotton, I don't know, corn, you know, all the things you stock for the feed and for hogs. They had everything, usual things.
A lot of slaves.
They would have had slaves before the Civil War.
Okay.
And the Stafford, of course, that name is about as English as you can get, and Meredith is also an English name. So now, here we have my grandma, here we going away when she's age 16, being sent away to school. But in the meantime, she and my grandfather had got to courting. And the way they did it was he would bribe the colored people that were with her to have her sit at a certain bench in the park. And he would come by and sit on the other end of the bench. And the colored woman would sit in between them. And they would talk back and forth in front of the colored woman, or else they would pass little notes back and forth. But he found that what she preferred to do was to talk. And in that arranged way, they decided that they were in love with each other, and she decided he was a very interesting person because they had the loveliest sense of humor, a very sweet, gentle, kind, amusing. So he'd look over at her, I'm quite sure he'd say, and he said, "You're a mighty pretty lady sitting over there at the other end of the bench." He said, "It's a shame we can't swap places." And she would just look demurely over and probably make eyes and flutter her eyelash or something like that, and he'd be smitten. Well, they decided to elope. And so the night that she was supposed to leave, night before she was supposed to leave to go to the girls' finishing school and get finished.
Any idea where that would have been?
I think it was at a place called Oxford, where my mother later went to school.
Oh, yeah?
Not in England. It was a woman's...
Durham?
Yeah, no, I don't know whether it was in Durham or Asheville, but it was called Oxford School for Girls. Mother went there 1 year, but then had to quit because her father died. So that's where she was going to go to finishing school. Because really, I don't know whether they had any schools in Raleigh at that time at all, but certainly her education had been sadly neglected, as I shall explain in just a moment. So the night before the wedding, the night before she was supposed to leave, he came to her house with a ladder, and the colored people who had been well provided with money helped hold the ladder, and the colored lady at the top helped get the bags and the boxes and everything out, and the trunks were passed down and the boxes were passed down, and someone was taking care of the dogs, so the dogs weren't howling. They loaded up this buggy that he had out there, pretty good sized buggy, loaded up with all her bags and stuff, and she came down and hopped in the buggy. And he had gone all the way back to Virginia to get the best horses he could get, and he'd gotten those horses down to Raleigh, and they were supposed to be the finest horses that there were, the fastest team that he could get. And he took off riding like hell. Of course, when they found out the next morning that Miss Emma was gone, and everything was gone, and she had just peeled out of there, the colored folks got called hell, but the whole Stafford family, all the farming men and everyone, took off chasing, trying to catch up with them to see who had snatched little Miss Emma.
Did she take a maid with her or anything?
Nope, didn't take anything with her. Just her
trunk. Her
trunks and stuff, and her husband. Well, they went batting like hell to a place called Hickory, North Carolina, in that area, where there was one of her. And
this was in what year?
The year they were married. Now, since I'm not so sure, I don't know just when it was. The horses held up. They weren't caught, and they got away to hide at this family of her cousin of hers. Now, what else about it, I don't know. It was a farm family. And it seems to me it was up near Hickory.
Cousin of Miss Emma's.
Cousins of hers. Mm-hmm. It may have been one of her.
Yerby's?
No, the Yerby was her husband, honey.
Oh, I mean.
It may have been a Stafford or a Meredith. I don't know which it was. Hmm. There were others down there. There were other names. There were also Poindexters and some others in her family. But anyhow, they got to this place. It was a large family, and the horses were put in, hidden, and everything put away. And when the men came there looking for Miss Emma, they said, well, we don't know where she is at all. The rest of the family showed up, and they went on, headed back toward thinking maybe going up to Richmond. Well, they never did catch him. And there was Miss Emma and her husband, and now they were in hiding, but they were successfully hidden on the farm of one of her relatives, who were so happy to have company, of course. Well, the first morning that they were there, he said, Emma, now I want you to fix my breakfast for me. I know that you would like to do that. And she said to him, why, Frank, certainly I would. I'm just delighted to fix your breakfast. So he went inside at the table after a while, and she called and said, now, Frank, you may come in to breakfast. And he came in, and he looked down at his plate, and what the hell was there but some little mud pies, mud cakes that she'd made. He said, what is this, Emma? These are mud cakes, she said. Well, Frank, honey, that's all I know about cooking. And so that was the end of that. It turned out she didn't know how to cook. Then he said, well, Emma, that may be the case, but though you don't know how to cook, he said, someone else will bring me some breakfast. Just read the newspaper to me and let's see what they have to say about our elopement. And so she got the newspaper out and she began to read.
What paper do you think this was?
Well, I don't know what paper it was because it didn't make any difference. She was making up every word she said. She was saying strange things, and he was listening to say, does it actually say that in the paper, Emma? And she said, certainly it does, Frank. And he went finally, he looked, and it turned out she couldn't read or write either. So he was upset. There he had this prettiest girl in North Carolina who couldn't cook and couldn't read or write. All she knew how to do was to be a young lady. That was all it was. So he decided that he would have to start a school. And so there were a number of kids in that family there, and he opened up what he called the Stafford School for studious somethings or something like that, you know. And he began to have classes for her and her cousins and anyone else that they'd get gathered in to run to the school. And he was teaching them reading and writing, arithmetic, and the various things that they needed to know. Well, she was pregnant for long, and when she was pregnant, she would sometimes get sick early in the morning. Have morning sickness, she wouldn't be able to come to class. So one day she couldn't come to class, and she came in a little bit late, and when she came in, she saw her cousin so-and-so was a little girl 16 to 17 years old with green eyes and red hair sitting on the lap of the teacher who was instructing her in how to neck. So Emma said, Frank, she said, this is the end of the school. I don't care if my education goes to your father or not. And so that ended the Stafford school, and from that time on, he more or less had to behave himself because she was watching for him. Well, now my grandmother Yerby told me that story. And these things that you hear now are things that I got from my grandmother Yerby. Now,
Grandmother Yerby.
that's Emma.
That's Emma herself.
Yeah, Emma herself. Okay, then, she told me that when the children were growing up, he just loved them and he was so sweet and nice to them.
How many children were there? There was Emma. Who was
Emma.
born first?
She was the last.
Who was first?
No, she wasn't the last. Talbot was the last.
Who was first?
I guess Carrie was the first. Then
Carrie the girl?
Then there was another one that may have died, and then there was Emma, and then there was Talbot, I believe.
Talbot was a boy?
Yeah. Well, it was a funny sort of family, though, in many ways. For one thing, one of the members of the family became quite a good writer in later years. Was a Stafford who wrote, and I've never been able to. She became quite a well-known writer. One of the Staffords lived in Asheville, North Carolina, where her husband, who was Talbot Stafford,
that was Talbot.
her daddy, who was Tal Stafford.
So this is Talbert's.
That's my grandmother's brother.
Brother's
brother,
child.
where he was a golf pro.
He was a golf pro.
He was a golf pro there.
And
his daughter,
Asheville?
Huh?
Asheville?
Asheville, North Carolina, where Thomas Wolfe was from, you know.
Uh-huh.
And his daughter or granddaughter, became quite a well-known writer, a novelist or something. Her name was Stafford.
Do you know her first name?
Maybe Jean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about it. But I know that there was some of the literary talent began to show then. And also in that family, I think it's where the manic depressive thing comes from, not in my father's family at all.
What makes you think that?
Because I think it shows my mother.
And your mother?
Yeah. Who would become very depressed at times, and other times very manic, you know.
Huh.
Now let's see, where we're going to go back to what she's told about some of her family.
Well, you just told me that the 3 kids were born.
Well, I'm not sure. There may have been more, and I know very little. I'm telling you things that my grandmother told me, and some things my mother told me. Charles, where you think you cut grass yet? Well, stop at the machine for a minute then, honey, will you?
Okay. He just said that the sense of humor that is in our family was probably entirely from his mother's family, but not in her. Is this thing working? I guess so. He's gone upstairs, he's coming back down. I'll turn it off again. Actually, see, she kind of sounds a lot like me. And they say I look like her, too. Yeah, I guess it's working.
I would say that the humor was in my mother's family mostly, but not very much in her. The teasing business among people is very much in my mother's family, but very little in her. She would tease a little bit, you know. When I was a little boy, she'd say, well, do you love me? And she'd look over at me and say, why, of course I love you, honey. Say, how much do you love me? She said, my love for you will ever flow like glasses down the Tater Road. I said, well, that's not very much, is it? She said, well, no, it's a whole lot, I think. And I say, well, I don't know how to do this. For one thing, she'd been marble champion in Raleigh, and then got to be state marbles champion in the whole state of North Carolina. When she was 10 years old, she was a marbles champion because they had the state fair there, you know.
Your
and she
mother?
practiced, yeah. She was a marbles champion of North Carolina, and we used to play marbles in the house on a rug. She'd take chalk and make a great big circle on the rug about 8 feet across. And no one could ever beat her. We just had no chance with her. She'd pow, whack the damn things from the other side. She'd also been an all-Richmond basketball player when she was living in Richmond when she was a little girl. She was an athlete. But she'd also had rheumatic fever, too.
So that's
when she was a child. Not genetic necessarily. A lot of people had rheumatic fever, but She had a bad heart, you know. As I do. Okay, now let me see. We were talking about.
Well, we'd gotten up to past the elopement.
Yeah, then the school came to a screeching end. And it came to a screeching end. And Miss Emma told me that after that...
Did they stay there in that town? What town was that?
I don't know where the town was. Out in the country, I think. It was
Hickory?
a farm.
Hickory?
I think it was a farm. All of these people were farmers, I believe.
But you don't know where it was near?
No, it was northern North Carolina, but where I don't know.
Did they stay there, or did he start?
No, they stayed there for a while, then the family forgave them. They came back and lived in Raleigh.
And he went back to working as a lawyer, or just as...
And he worked for the, sort of a bureaucrat, I think, for the state. One of the insurance agencies. Well, maybe he was in charge of insurance in North Carolina, something like that, you know.
Did he go to law school?
Yes, he was a lawyer. He'd been a lawyer. And he was a judge, justice of the peace. And he was worked in the legislature, some sort of a clerk or something, but not as a... In other words, he was sort of a bureaucrat in North Carolina. Well, now, he had a son.
Talbot?
I think Talbot was my grandmother's... I don't remember the name of what was the name of my... Uncle Tal. There was Uncle Tal and Uncle Lem. Lemanuel. Uncle Talbot was the one who was the athlete and went...
Golf.
Huh?
Golf.
No. Who went to college in North Carolina and became an all-state or all-American football player. And so after Talbot graduated from college, as they often was the case in those days, and today indeed, the state politicians who were so proud of the way he played football for the University of North Carolina, they kept giving him jobs and easy, cushiony jobs and things like that in the state, making places for him to do things, you know. And from that he moved into, I can't remember whether it was, I guess it was Talbot, yeah. From that he went over to take charge of the golf course of the country club in Asheville, which was the Society Country Club, you know. It was a country club where the Vanderbilts lived, but nearby there, and all the other people over in Asheville. It was a big resort area, sort of like the Homestead is here. And there for a number of years, either he or, I think it was he. And I went there once and met him there and saw his daughter and all that stuff many years ago. Only time I ever was in that area. My father and I went down to Skyline Drive one time and we ended up in Nashville, went over to the country club, and lo and behold, there was my uncle.
Great uncle.
Yeah, but younger than my uncle. Now my mother's brother, Lem, Uncle Lem, Emmanuel, was also an interesting person. He was...
Wait, I'm confused. Talbot was your mother's...
My mother's uncle, who was younger than her brother, Lem.
So Talbot was your sister your grandmother Emma's brother?
Yeah. And who he married, I don't remember, but she was a little wizened woman, little skinny woman who went zipping around all the time.
And they had football was a big deal back then?
He played football then, yes.
Around the turn of the century?
No, this was after the turn of the century, you see.
He was a much younger brother.
Well, he was younger than
Aunt Emma.
Than the children of... He was younger than Carrie. Okay. And Carrie, I think, was born before 1900. Well, I know she was, because she was 10 or 15 years old when my mother, I don't know, that would have to work out. I don't know. Those relationships my mother never fooled with. She said the family was so disreputable, she didn't want to know anything about it.
Why did you think they were disreputable?
She was just joking, you know. The way people tease. Because in my other family, my grandmother Frances was so always interested in finding out all sorts of things about the past, and Mother didn't have no interest whatsoever in that. None at all. Okay, now let's see. We were talking about so far as I know, she had one brother, Uncle Lemanuel. And we won't talk anymore about my mother, my grandma, and my grandfather now. We'll talk about Uncle Emmanuel for a minute, in that he had an interesting marriage. He was married to somebody.
So he was born, or he was...
He was my mother's brother.
Younger?
Older.
Older.
Mother was the youngest in the family.
Right.
She was the last child.
So Carrie was born,
then Lem.
Then Lem.
And then
Maybe one who died.
Yeah, maybe, and then my mother. Now, in that family also, there was an aunt who painted, and we have some of her paintings here. My mother used to say of her, to distinguish her from me and from my father, she said she was a real artist, meaning that my father was not a real artist and that I am not a real artist. As a matter of fact, she'd had some training, but she was a stinking, terrible, she really had no imagination at all in her paintings.
How do you know? You saw the painting?
We have two of her paintings here. I'll show them to you.
We do?
Yeah.
And she was...
She was one of my mother's aunts. Now, whether she would have been one of the Stafford clan, not the Yerby clan, I think.
So she was Aunt Emma's sister?
No, not Aunt Emma's sister, but maybe a great sister, or, a cousin, something like that. I don't know. They called her aunt because she was old, I think. Mm-hmm. But she studied painting, and maybe she lived in Richmond. I don't know, because she could be that she lived in Richmond. But let me go on now and talk about...
Studied painting in Paris?
No, I don't think in Paris. Not to paint like that. She wasn't that good. Well, she studied a little bit of painting probably, but she could paint a little bit. She probably did pretty well with bigger pictures. By the time she was painting these pictures that she gave my mother, she was quite up in years, 75 or 80. Had very little money to buy canvases. I think painted little bitty pictures of things that she's done before, basically. The things that we have that she painted are two. One is a picture of a little lake with some trees out in the middle of it, and I think I've seen that in one of the geography books somewhere that I saw years ago. And the other thing that she painted, and how she did this, I don't know, but it seems to have been a painting up here in Millborough. Do you still have the tape, or is it quit?
No, it's going.
I don't see it turning.
It is.
All right.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
One of them seems to me was a painting done up here in Millborough, and I don't know whether my mother took her a photograph or something or not. She was still living when my mother got married.
Uh-huh.
And these were paintings given to my mother as a wedding present.
Now,
she died soon after, and I don't remember her name.
Oh. Was she married?
I don't know. I know nothing about her except what she said, and it seems to me she was old, living on a very tiny little bit of money, all alone in a place perhaps, and my mother went to see her and things like that. Just an elderly female relative who painted.
Uh-huh. Where did she live?
I think in Richmond.
Richmond.
Because by that time my mother left North Carolina, was living in Richmond, All right, now let's go back now.
What about Uncle Lem?
I'm going to tell you about Uncle Lem. He married twice. I met his first wife about 1936, 37, 38, somewhere along there, down at Ocean View when we were down there in the summertime, and Uncle Lem came with his wife. And as I recall, they were there staying in a hotel or something and playing a good deal of golf and swimming some. And he seemed to me to be drinking an awful lot of whiskey, which my father was doing at the same time. And so he and Father were generally sitting around out there on the veranda where we were staying at Virginia Beach, at Ocean View, and drinking liquor. And he and his wife were having scenes or something. And it seems to me they had a child, but I'm not sure. But anyhow, they soon afterwards got divorced. And he was an alcoholic by that time, and drunk and everything, thought nothing in the world would ever come of Uncle Lem.
How old was he?
He must have been about 40, 50 then. He was in the late 30s, he must have been in his 30s then, I guess. Maybe 40, a little bit older. Wasn't long, you see, before my grandmother Yerby, his mother, died. She died after the Second World War, about 1947, 48, 49, somewhere along in there. And I remember seeing him again then at her funeral. All right, let's go back now to
grandmother Yerby?
My grandmother Yerby.
And Emma's mother?
Emma herself.
Oh, Emma herself. Oh, right.
She was the first Yerby in our family.
Right, but she was really a Stafford.
She was a Stafford who married a Yerby.
Right, okay.
Okay, so, let me see, where are we?
She was called Aunt Emma, huh?
No, Miss Emma.
Miss Emma.
Okay, I called her a different name entirely. I called her Adelie. That was the name I called her.
Adelie?
Adelie. Because when I was a little bitty baby, I couldn't pronounce the. My mother called her Duncan.
Duncan.
And other people had different names for her.
Why do people have so many names for her?
I don't know. Women in Richmond often have a strange relationship with each other. It's a sort of incestuous, half-lesbian relationship. They look over and say, "How you feeling, darling?" And, "Darling, I'm feeling just fine. How you feeling?" I'm feeling all right, sweetheart. Would you like a little bit of Coca-Cola? Honey, I would like just a little bit of Coca-Cola if you don't mind. Precious, give me more pleasure than to give you a little bit of Coca-Cola. Here, help yourself.
Like on that movie last night.
Oh, a bunch of crap. I mean, you get driven nuts. They're teasing each other and laughing and joking about it, but at the same time, it drives you nuts.
It doesn't drive me nuts.
Do you remember Mrs. Van Leer, some of the company she would sometimes have up there? She was from Richmond, you know.
A little bit.
Well, she would sit up there and they'd say, honey, may I give you a beer? Well, I'd just love to have another beer, honey. Help yourself. No, wait, I'll fix it for you. You don't need to trouble yourself, child. You all like that, you know. I can do it, but it's only because I heard it a little bit when I was a bunch of junk.
So what happened with
my mother? And anyhow, that was the way my grandmother was with her daughter Carrie, who, after all, had been born when my grandmother was only 17.
Yeah, but she wasn't really that way with your mother, was she?
Yes, she was that way with my mother, too.
But your mother wasn't that way with anybody?
With her, yeah.
With her, but not with other people, was she?
A little bit with us, with the children, but not very much. Mm-hmm. My mother had a very serious life. She had a very messed up life, you know, but I got to go back to that later.
Okay, so
now we're talking about
Uncle Liam.
Uncle Liam got married again later. Now, Second World War came along.